In today's episode, expect to learn how movement can become an outlet for emotions we don't yet have words for, why embracing anger, vulnerability, and chaos can lead to powerful creativity, what Shaun has learned about burnout, balance, and the danger of tying your entire identity to work, and much, much more. Today, I'm joined by Shaun, a contemporary dancer and choreographer whose bold and uncompromising work explores human instinct, vulnerability, and connection. Over the last 15 years, he's collaborated with some of the UK's leading dance organisations, from Matthew Bourne's New Adventures to Sadler's Wells, and his pieces have been performed at many of the country's most iconic venues and festivals. Welcome to the Lonely Chapter podcast, where we learn from fascinating guests each week about how to navigate the world we live in. I'm your host, Sam McLean. Wherever this finds you, thanks for listening. Let's dive in. When you strip everything back, technique, training, and even audience expectation, what's at the core of why you dance?
In its most purest form, it's just expression. I think most people that work in the space I do in the art space, it's just like if I was able to write, I'd be a writer. If I had the words, I'd be a poet, but I don't have any of those things. I have movement. So for me, it's being able to, just express things that I don't have the ability to express in other ways. I grew up quite like fidgety and anxious, kind of classic case of like typical over energized young boy that didn't know how to sort of like get those things out of themselves. So I think the initial starting point for me in dance was like, I just needed to move. I was quite an angry kid at school for a lot of different reasons. And it wasn't until I started like moving that sort of started to dissipate and sort of get out of me. So I think the reason I started with it was that getting the anger out and getting all the negative energy out. But now for me, it's like any human emotion is celebrated in the joy of movement. If I'm in a good place, I move. If I'm in a bad place, I want to move. If I'm feeling static in loads of different ways, the only thing I want to do is move or teach or create. So I think adding them back in the technique and the training and all those things, it's just allowed me to have the skills that allow me to impart that now.
Mm. When you said about fidgeting and stuff like that, so that's now looking back on it, you see that was almost an outlet for letting out some of the stuff. That was how you were letting energy out in a movement form. When was the first time you realized that movement consciously could be an outlet?
I don't really think it happened until I was because I got into dance quite late for sort of most people, especially lads tend to get into it late. So I didn't start really dancing and thinking about dance as like something serious until I was about 16, 17. And it wasn't really until then that I started to realize the sort of mental benefit that I was sort of gaining. Because originally, when I was younger, I wanted to join the military.
Okay.
But the motivation for that was based in like tradition and sort of an outlet for anger. And they're not really the right reasons to do that. And then as soon as I started actually dancing and working with my two teachers at school, Simon and Ali, I realized that actually that motivation, that anger was like, oh, it doesn't feel like it's there as much, or it's like not as loud of a voice in my head. And then I started to slowly realize it was like, oh, maybe it's because I'm dancing and I'm actually like getting the chance to express and show how I feel, not just internalize it and then externalizing it in a violent or aggressive way.
Yeah. Finding the right path to sort of release what's inside. How do you go from making an emotion or a feeling into a movement? Is there a process you go through for that?
Depends on the goal. So if I'm trying to do that just purely for self, there's no process. It's just do and play and experiment and move. So if I'm in the studio and it's just me and I just need to move for whatever reason, it's just go and do it. And it'll be improvisation and I'll just feel my way through that. If there's a goal in terms of like creatively, or we're trying to create a work or show something within a work that is X emotion, Y emotion, Z feeling, Y feeling, the process is a lot more complex. It's, and again, that depends on who you're creating that with.
Yeah.
If you're working with young people, if you're working with professionals or adults, anyone across that sort of spectrum, there's a different type of process. When you're working with young people, you're a guardian for their headspace and their well-being. So that has to be taken so seriously and respected. My approach to that is that I'm the amplifier and they're the instruments, and I'm just turning up what their voices are, and trying to guide them towards understanding. So yeah, it can be really complex or it can be really, really simple, depending on the reason or the sort of end result.
Yeah. So playing that amplifying part of it. So you get maybe more specifically newer dancers or younger dancers. How do you go from changing them from someone who can just follow steps that you're teaching them to actually amplifying their voice through their dance?
Process. It's a long process. And I think across my body of work, the sort of best results in that are with the students that I've been able to work with over a longer period of time. Developing their toolkit. I always talk a lot about like the right instruments or the right tools in their toolkit to be used at the right moment. When they're young, it's about, like, when I say it's young, it's like young teenagers is sort of, or teenagers is my specialism. So when they're around that age, it's kind of giving them the physical skills, and then their physical skills give them a baseline that then they can work from as reference points. And then from that, it's actually then allowing them to be heard, giving them a space where they feel safe to communicate and feel. And there's a sort of mantra that maybe I don't often externalize to my dancers, but for me, it's something that I try and embed in my practice, is that every emotion is okay, but not every behavior is okay. So it's understanding how to feel your emotions, but not react to them in the wrong ways.
Yeah.
And then giving them the space to create around those. In terms of growing their voice, it's giving them the freedom, giving them the framework and the foundations to build that. What that looks like is different to every student. There's not a sort of one size fits all. There are dancers that naturally have an affinity to using their voice. There are young people that have a natural resilience or resistance to that. So for me, the more I get to know them, the more I try and understand them as people and young humans, the more I can sort of open doors for them to do that and really grow their artistic voice and their human voice.
Yeah, I like what you said about what you encourage them to sort of feel their emotions, but then choose the correct behaviors coming out of that. Like, so often we feel emotions and we act on them instinctively without actually thinking why. And I think, yeah, it's a brilliant thing to instill, especially in younger people going into young adulthood, is when you feel an emotion, there's nothing wrong with feeling it, but you've got to sit with it and understand, why did that happen and what's the best course of action. Like, and again, there's going to be times where things happen just like that and you are going to react too quick, but then looking back on it and reflecting on it and learning, looking back in time as well, is something that I just wanted to touch on there as well. Tell me a bit about your dance and how did you find, what type of dance do you specialize in, and how did you come about to finding that was the one that you got on with?
So I'm a contemporary dance artist. I I hate using that word, contemporary dancer. Um, I've kind of found it almost straight out the gate, because I didn't have the traditional technical vocabulary that a lot of dancers have now. So I didn't really do ballet. I didn't do jazz or tap or any of these sort of traditional styles. At 16, all I wanted to do is throw myself around a studio and just look cool. Um, Maybe that's the wrong motivation, but it helped me at the time. Um, I sort of when I went off to university, I kind of realized that actually having that access to contemporary vocabulary was really beneficial, because it meant that I was almost like a canvas. Um, without having to take anything away, I could just add. Um, and I really sort of, it wasn't until my sort of early mid 20s that I started to actually understand what my style in that world was. I mean, contemporary dance is great because it can bring in anything that's current. You can use it to influence and build on. And that's kind of where I found it. All of my biggest influences were the people that were coming through or establishing what was contemporary at the time. So I find great sense of influence from your Matthew Bournes, your Hoffa Schechters, your Akram Khans, Yasmin Vardaman. Even now, I'm Ohad Naharin, these contemporary dance companies, NDT, these big rep companies that make. I'm a really visual, like I visually interested. So a lot of my influences come from movement that really shifts and really hits you. So anything that's like hard hitting, I kind of galvanizes me. And that's really sort of carved and shaped my style. It's not quiet, it's quite loud, which kind of suits me and is kind of fit into my personality anyway.
Yeah. So that on that hard hitting sort of, and some of your work's been described as like brutally honest as well. What do those words look like in movement?
Just highly physical is definitely the way I would describe it most. Is like, it's hard to really like describe the movement in terms of like a sequence of like things you can program and visualize as steps. I would say it's very primitive. It's very human. And I think like for me, it's the best way to describe it is like, it's heavy metal. Like, it's not quiet. It's very in your face. It wants to punch. It wants to throw. It wants to crash. But then in that, there's a beauty in that chaos. And it's always trying to find the sort of balance between the really highly physical power movements, but then the delicacy in that. Like there's a metaphor I used with some students a few years ago for a project where it was like, it's kind of like a feather in a hurricane, that you've got this chaos, this violence, but then in that you've got this sort of really delicate thing floating in the quiet moments. So it's more of like an imagery based description of like how that translates, which maybe is a little bit more accessible to a non-dance audience.
Yeah, and I think like saying like heavy metal as well makes me think of like looking at the crowd, say, you think of a crowd of someone like Ed Sheeran, people might be sort of standing there swaying slowly to like beautiful songs. And then heavy metal crowd, you've got mosh pits and stuff. So
Yeah.
in movement wise, maybe it's obviously with more choreographed.
In the Venn diagram of those, I'm somewhere in that. But I grew up listening to like a lot of that music. I was exposed to like the heavy rock and roll when I was a kid. I used to go to gigs loads, and it's really shaped my sort of, obviously my music taste, but also like my creative influences. I like things to be loud and brash, and there's room for subtlety and subversion and nuance, and that stuff is always, I try and embed it with my work. But if we're going to be creatively honest about the world we live in, or the place we're at, or things that we feel, we don't always have to be quiet with those. We can scream and shout those things. And I think as well, working with young people, there's a real power to allowing them to feel that, especially in the negative space, because we're human. We feel the negative emotions. They're part of who we are. Like, you can't have light without shadow. It's something I say a lot to my dancers. So we need to acknowledge those bits of ourselves, but understand how to creatively navigate them. because if we shut them off or ignore them or bury them away because we're told that they're bad and we shouldn't feel angry, we're not acknowledging parts of who we are. Um, and I don't think there's power in that. I think there's power to actually like navigating those and finding the creative way of expressing that.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, finding a creative and safe way of expressing these more negative emotions, um, and hopefully in a more constructive and world-changing way going forward as well. Like we look at how people speak to each other online at the minute, or even in person a lot of the time, and it is so negative. So to be able to put stuff maybe into a movement, something that's more beautiful and someone watching can understand what's going on without actually knowing exactly what it is. And it's down to how much of it comes down to interpretation of the person watching as well.
I mean, quite a lot of it. I don't like, as much as I like to be stark and brutally sort of use that term, like brutally honest and really sometimes clear. I also do like to bury things underneath layers. And I do like audiences to interpret things in different ways. I'd rather 5 different interpretations of one thing because for you, that's what you've taken from it. Which means that, I mean, I don't really care what your interpretation is as long as you felt something. That's really the end result, is if you feel something, good, bad, then I'm kind of doing what I'm supposed to do. And my performers are doing what they're supposed to do, which is stir something up. So the interpretation is sort of my secondary goal. It's the feeling is the primary. If you, my audiences, especially in recent years, have tended to be friends, family, parents, and your traditional, they're coming to support the company rather than, a sad as well as audience, for example, a dance savvy audience. So if I can get a parent who doesn't watch dance, but they go to watch their kid, feel something in a work where their kid's not even part of it, then there's something really, for me, interesting in that. I always think of like just an average person who doesn't watch or engage with dance coming to watch a show and they come out going, oh, that was really beautiful. That for me is a win. As much as I want obviously to create work for, dance audiences, there's an interest for me in making work for people. It's making work for people.
It resonates with me 100% because I've come to one of your shows. I've seen, as someone who's never danced, well, other than very badly in a nightclub maybe, but I've never like really been into it. I obviously have seen it, and my partner, she dances as well. But going to that, yeah, it's exactly the experience you laid out there. Like I could appreciate the beauty of it, and I wouldn't say that I'd be able to explain it as well. It's a weird sort of place to be in. Like,
Yeah.
I don't know what it was about it, but there was the flow of it all and the movement. Yeah, it does something. So it's good art. You've worked with some of the UK's biggest organisations, dance organisations and choreographers. What's the most sort of unexpected thing that you've learned from them?
It's interesting the unexpected, because there are really clear things that I could say and point to that I've learned that I'm like, oh, that seems to be like, I'd expect to learn that, in terms of practice and art just in general. I think that there's a fine line between being really, really good at what you do and being maniacal about what you do, and how willing are you to dance that line?
Yeah. Explain that.
I spent a lot of my career, all my career, as an absolute workaholic. My work has been above at most things in my life. I tend to often put everybody else before anything related to me. And that's led me to measurable success, but it's also led me to sort of stand at points and look back and be like, oh, I wish I'd done this differently. And I think from watching choreographers that are infinitely better than me and have way more skills and way more high level thinking, almost in that same space of uncompromising. Now I'm in my mid 30s. I'm like, okay, well, what do I actually want to do? Do I want to carry on like this? I mean, I'm never going to get to that level, and that's okay. I've also come to accept that I'm like, actually, I don't really want that. What I want to do is give back. So I don't really know if I'm answering the question here so much as to say what I've learned from them is the things that they have had to do to get to where they are. I thought I was doing, or maybe I have done, but without realizing it. But it's not led me down the same pathways, and that's okay.
It's clarified why you do it
Yeah,
your way, and it's clarified what you want out of it.
yeah, I think so. There are micro things that I learned that were unexpected, like not everyone's going to be nice to you. Not everyone, you're not going to enjoy everything you do. Just because you work in your passion doesn't mean it's always going to be great. There are some jobs that I've done that I didn't do well. I didn't get treated maybe the way I thought I was going to. And there's a part, definitely partly from my mistakes, and I'll own those things. But not everyone's going to be your friend. Not everyone wants to help. And maybe because so much of what I want to do is based in helping others and supporting others, the revelation of going, not everyone's like that.
Yeah.
Not everyone's interested in that is maybe the unexpected. Maybe that's actually the answer. Not everyone's as willing to help and support. And that's not to say that, that's a problem in that, but it's just not who I am.
Yeah. And again, it goes back to your first answer of it, is that it's that clarifying the differences between you and them, and what you align with is different, and that's okay. But yeah, your paths are just slightly different within the same area of work. So you mentioned in there about how you wanted to give back to people and how you realized that you enjoy helping people. Why is it that that's important to you?
To answer the question super honestly is I don't feel like I have very much self-worth unless I'm helping somebody. A lot of my identity is wrapped up in being there for other people. I think that stems from maybe not 100% knowing outside of that who I am, because of so much of my identity is about leading or supporting or creating. And like I said earlier, in terms of I spent so much of my 20s doing my work as my identity, I almost fallen into that black hole space of going, well, what else is there to me? It comes from a place of like deficit, which is it's an interesting thing to occupy, because we're always taught to be like, don't be a people pleaser, don't say yes to everything, and you can't do it. You can't do that. If you're empty, what have you got to give? And so much of that is true. That's absolutely true. But when it's who you are is the blueprint of who you are, it's like, well, I can't just stop doing that to replenish, because part of the replenishment comes from that. It's really hard, and I know I very much dodged speaking to people about that for a long time, and I've sort of always just been like, oh well, I can use my art to deal with those things.
I appreciate your honesty.
Yeah, we can go there.
Is it something you talk about it and you say that you can acknowledge it? Like a lot of people who are in that space and they wouldn't even be able to acknowledge it. So you can see it. Is it something that you're trying to change in yourself?
Trying, definitely, which only seems to be a quite recent thing. Last sort of 18 months, I've navigated quite a lot of different things. lots of change. Um, and I think I've had a couple of years where I've really, really hit burnout mode. There was a few years ago where I sort of counted the amount of work I'd made. And I think it was in the course of like one academic year, I'd made nearly 30 works,
Wow.
half of which were all over 15, 20, 25 minutes long, which is a huge amount of output. And trying to do that, run your company, support other people, have some form of a life, a relationship, navigate the complexities of just being a person. And just that level of creative output isn't, I don't think it's normal. And I don't particularly think it's healthy because you're trying then to make every single work look and feel different, trying to have 25, 30 new and original ideas. And I haven't really stepped down from that gear of creating. I've kind of actually just put the foot down and tried to sustain it. And I think that especially in the last sort of 10 months, 12 months, with a couple of injuries and change, I've really realized I'm like, actually, I'm not sustainable if I keep doing this. So I am actively trying to change, but also I'm also at the point where I'm questioning how much capacity do I have to change. Because if I really wanted to change, I would I'd take myself more seriously. But being the person I am, it's like, oh, I could just make a joke about it, bury it and crack on. So I think there's a sustainability that I can manage, but there's also a sustainability that I shouldn't be managing. And trying to do those two things it's tricky.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. It's something I've been thinking about quite a lot, actually, in terms of identity and how we identify ourselves. So I think a lot of the times we make what we do into our personal identity, whether that's work or political beliefs or anything like that. And I think the importance is to identify yourself as something, but not to make it your personal identity. So if I look at myself, I'm Sam. I work as a firefighter. I host a podcast. I run. I go to the gym. These are all things that I can identify with. I can identify myself as a firefighter. But if I make that my personal identity and I am Sam and I am a firefighter, that is me and that's all I talk about, or whichever one of those things I want to sort of identify as. If I lose that thing out of my own choice or out of a choice out of my hands, it will like cripple me because and again, to go back to another conversation I had on this podcast, I learned this from Lee Eldridge and he spoke about pillars. So if you picture your life being held up by a number of pillars, it might be your family life, your work life, your hobbies, etc. And all these pillars, as you put more time into one, that pillar gets wider and the other pillars will get narrower because of it, because you've only got a finite amount of time. And if you lose that wide pillar and you look at what's actually holding you up over here, it's loads of really skinny ones. So it's like a visualization on the reminder that balancing what we do in our lives as well is such an important thing.
Let me know if you ever get that right, how you done it.
Yeah. And that's the thing,
yeah.
I don't think there is a way to get it right.
No, I don't think there is. Like, I mean, I've spent my entire career just being the biggest hypocrite because everything that I do, I tell everyone else not to do. I say to my students, don't be like me. I'm not the role model for that. There are plenty of people that show that better. It's definitely, I'm definitely at the point where I know who I am, but if it's just one thing, what am I? It's an interesting sort of mental bit of gymnastics to play with. Yeah.
And it's something that a lot of people resonate with, I think. Have you made any works around that? Is that sort of influenced any of your recent choreography?
No, I am currently, I'm about to start, hopefully. It's been in my brain for about 2 years now, like to make a new solo. So I've operated in the youth dance space for quite a long time, but I'm not just a youth dance choreographer. I am a choreographer, and I want to make professional work without the talking about the issues of funding and all access. There's a solo that I've wanted to make now that deals with sort of the things I've been trying to navigate for the last couple of years. So hopefully that's on the horizon. So please give me some funding. But in terms of recently, no, because I've operated in the youth dance space, the work isn't about me. It's about the people I work for and work in service of. So it's what they want to say. I don't think it's particularly. I'm not doing them a service if I tell them what things are, what the world is like. If I stamp sort of, this is where I'm at as a 34-year-old man, and put that on young people, there's no interest in that for me. And I don't particularly think that's a good thing. We're a generation removed from each other. They experience the world very differently to me. And I want to help them deal with that and understand that. So the work we create, the work I have been creating, youth focused, works with youth brains, but the amplification of those voices aims to be in making professional work on young people. That's really my skill set, and for the last period of time, is trying to get them to perform on a level that is youth dance but different. I'd love to continue and sort of reignite the professional strand of my work and make a little bit more work that works with myself a little bit more. I'm getting older. I'm mid-30s. I'm not old. I'm not old by any stretch, but in the next 10 years, my body won't be able to do what it does now. So I do want to move. I do want to create some more work, not for me, but through me, for others. I want to make work that exists in what my experience of the world is, but not make it selfish. It's my experience and my feeling, but the accessible emotions around them is what I want to explore and, transmit to stage. So it might be that I've been feeling, imposter syndrome. I feel that, and I have felt that quite heavily in the last sort of 12 months. But I'm not going to talk about that on stage personally, because then that alienates. I'm going to talk about that as a feeling that other people can navigate and go, oh, I understand that feeling. I know what that feels like. The idea of maybe like over giving and over supporting and feeling kind of like I'm giving so much, I'm emptying myself. That is an experience I have felt personally, but there's a universality to that audiences can resonate with. So it's taking the feeling, the experience that I have, and drawing that back to the thing that we experience. So it's in the oven, but I need to put the heat on it now.
Yeah, start cooking.
Yeah.
So when we look at dance as a whole, do you see it as more of a mirror of society or an escape from society?
It's definitely both. Again, depending on the format. Like if you're going to watch a work at Sadler's Wells, or anywhere, you're looking to see art. Depending on the company, if you're going to watch a Matthew Bourne work, which is very cinematic, and it's a world outside of the world, with levels of depth in there. But it's definitely more of an escapism. Watching The Nutcracker by Matthew Bourne or Swan Lake by Matthew Bourne isn't the same as watching Vertical Road by Akram Khan. It's a very different type of art, even though it exists in the same space. But then if you're going out to dance in the club, you're escaping, as a release to that. So it really depends on the purpose. So I think both of those two things are important. And I think that the best work brings those two things together and hybridizes them. we want to escape. But, depending on your interest point, reflecting the world we live in is important because it helps us navigate it and understand it. Um, I know the work that I make aims to dance in that space of two things. But more often than not, because of the space I occupy as a creator, it aims to actually let's hold a mirror up. We made a work recently with my youth dance company that was quite, for them, it was very topical. And for me, it was trying to go, okay, well, this is the world we live in right now. Let's navigate it. Let's understand it. Let's talk about it. And then find a really positive way to share that experience. So, the human emotions can be used for understanding, but also escaping.
Yeah, it's definitely in the middle of both, isn't it?
Yeah.
So in your work with sort of youth education, as you said, you've been doing over the more recent years, quite a lot of your work as well, it revolves around getting boys into dance as well. Why is it important to get more boys into dance? So I assume it's quite a female dominated space.
You just look at the statistics and it's alarming that, and this has maybe always been the case, but generationally, we struggle. But we more often than not struggle in silence, and we struggle quietly. And I think as someone that works with young people and cares about everybody across the gender spectrum, but as a male dance teacher, I know that I can empathize in a different way with that voice, and allow young male dancers to see the work we do and see the work I do and go, oh, okay, well, if he can do it, maybe I could do that. I think I have a duty to that as an artist. I have a duty to give back and to pass on. And I think we all should take that role in whatever capacity that looks like. But I think specializing in boys dance is just something that I've always done because it's part of my identity. And I know that it changed my pathway from something that was really negative to something that's really positive. And I know that as a young lad that struggled in silence and acted in behaviors that I didn't realize why I was doing that, I see that happening now still. And a lot of it to do with expression, but there's so much of it is to do with purpose. And I feel like there is in young people, if you can give a young person purpose, it's transformative. And I look at my dancers, and this is a universal thing, but maybe with young boys, it's a little bit trickier. But that sense of purpose can be quite vacant. Like the world they live in occupies screens and games, and it's not based so much in reality and human interaction. And it's very hard you can find purpose in those spaces, but it's very, very difficult. But I know from working with my dancers that if you give someone that sense of purpose, it grounds them in a strand of identity. So when everything else is unstable, when everything else is unbalanced and chaotic and crazy, and your body's changing and your brain chemistry is changing and you're navigating family, relationships, school, college, exams, all of that unbalance, you can be like, well, actually, I've got this thing that I do weekly. I go to a dance class. And in that space, none of that matters. I'm a dancer. I have purpose. We work together. We move together. We express. We talk. That sense of purpose, as I said, is absolutely transformative. And whether you are male, female, or everything in that space, it is so empowering. And we're not, obviously, as boys, we're not told or we're not encouraged as much to go to dance class. It is more often than not seen as it is for girls. I'm very fortunate in that I've worked in schools where boys dance has become really normalized. And I've been part of that building of psychology in those schools. But if you go to different parts of the country, completely different socialized social norms and values, it just isn't still. We do look at it as very different and very off the cuff or out of the ordinary. And more often than not, that is seen as a negative or is seen as that's strange. And it shouldn't be, because dance and movement is human. It's not gender specific. It's human. We were moving before we could talk. We were responding to rhythm and sound before we could communicate. What more do we need to, how else do we need to look at it? It's just it's for everybody. It can be for anybody. So the stigma behind it is something that I'm always really interested in challenging, that boys can dance and boys can emote and express, and that vehicle and giving them that platform is something that I do take very, very seriously.
Yeah, it's good to hear. And yeah, like you say, finding that purpose is a massive thing. People of all genders feel, I think, not having a sense of purpose in life is one of the most common ways people end up in very dark places. Yeah, I sort of think back to when I was younger, and maybe we had like a lot of youth clubs back then. Seems like a lot of those have shut down, and Scouts was then a boys' place, and now I believe it's a mix in a lot of places. So having those places where boys can go and be together and express themselves and have someone who understands their experiences and their feelings and help them articulate that into a movement or into whatever else sort of expression there is, I think is so important. So yeah, it's good to hear it's really important work. When you look at some of your more professional work that you've done, and it's been shown in some of the UK's biggest venues across the UK, how does it feel watching that and knowing that you've created it?
I mean, if it's hard to switch off the like, how can it be better? When I'm watching any work, is I'm watching my own work going, how can I develop that? How can I make it better next time? How can I improve it? What didn't maybe hit the way I wanted to? And that voice is obviously the dominant, because you're always like, you aim for perfection and you settle for what's beneath that, whatever that is. Knowing that perfection isn't possible, but the striving for it. So it always feels good when I maybe don't do as much reflection as I should, because I'm always like, what's next? I'm a big fan of the West Wing, so what's next to me is always like a thing that I live and die by. So yeah, I find reflecting really hard, because maybe I don't know why, but patting myself on the back just feels really tough. But showing work at the Edinburgh Fringe Festival and collaborating and showing some work at Sadler's Wells East and Sadler's Wells and these other organisations around the country, like there is a sense of accomplishment, but it's always like, in hindsight, when I'm in the space, when I'm in the room, it's like, okay, how can this be better?
Yeah.
But it's also then quickly followed up with, what if this is finite? What if I don't get this opportunity again? How do I make this more frequent? And I'm at the place in my career where I would love for those opportunities to have grown. To have taken work on tour is something I've not done. To have taken work and had a run of shows at X theatre, or be produced and programmed. These things I'm always sort of like, oh, I wish. Why can't it happen for me? And I know that there's a generation of choreographers that exist in the same place. There's so many incredible choreographers that make unbelievable work, but just because they don't have the writing skills for an Arts Council grant, or have someone behind them that will help them with that or can support them on that, um, they fall into a vacant space. And I have had like support offered to me, but not the support that I really need. Um, or maybe it's I'm almost like don't feel like I'm deserving of that support, and so I almost have a tendency to maybe push it away subconsciously.
What is the support that you need?
I mean, I don't know. I know where my weaknesses are. I know that I'm not smart enough to write an Arts Council grant application, and it doesn't matter who tells me I can. I know I can. Um, and I'd loved a producer to come in and be like, I'm going to do it for you and with you and show that belief. And I have had people offer that support, and we've had conversations, and I get them very scared, and my lack of knowledge and my lack of, well, not lack of, my fear that I'm not going to be good enough manifests in I shut down and push away, and then I get angry, and then it just falls apart. So I know a lot of that progress is self-stunted, but then there's also so many barriers stopping people like me from doing that. The arts is dominated by middle class people. It's a very classist structure. In dance, in drama, in music, the people at the top of the pile, more often than not, do not come from working class voices. They emulate them. All you need to do is listen to the way Michael Sheen talks about Wales and the Welsh voices coming from that working class, proudly working class space. We don't get the opportunities to sustain or to access. And that is something that we need to do something better about. We need to do something about. And we need to be better at supporting those voices. And I'm not, I'm not here talking about myself. I'm here talking about the people that work in this space that have had to quit and give up because it's not possible, or that they're hanging in by a thread and trying to thrift and beg and steal for opportunity. We have to do better as an industry across the arts sector to champion those voices. Because we're at a point where we're doing a much better job at inclusion and diversity. And that is absolutely rightly so. Like supporting voices of people that haven't had voices is incredibly important. But there is definitely a divide in class and sustainability that needs to be addressed.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing, isn't it? Because it's quite UK specific. They don't have the class divide as much when you look at places like America. But you're missing out on a load of the population and a load of lived experiences, aren't you? Like that's the whole point of diversity and inclusion now, is to get more voices in who have had different lived experiences. But people from like a working class background have those. They have that different lived experience. So you're almost limiting what it can be by not including them, because they'll never be able to understand that angle and that view of the world. So by not including them, you're limiting the potential of the art, right?
It's the authenticity. There's an amazing response that Denzel Washington gave when he spoke about the difference between, I think it was talking about culture and authenticity. I won't try and regurgitate what he said, but you may have seen it. It's a really interesting clip. I recommend looking it up. He talks about like knowing the culture and being in the culture, and it's just a really, really beautifully nuanced response he gives to a question about that. And maybe I'm not qualified to speak on too much about diversity and inclusion, but I know because I'm a white male choreographer. But in terms of like, I see an indifference in class, and I think we could do more about dealing with that.
What changes, so that sort of changes into the more professional space. And we spoke about education before that, and obviously about boys and how a lot of your work as well has been about creating that, trying to break down that stigma around boys dancing. What other changes in education would be beneficial in terms of how dance is taught?
Seismic. We need seismic change in our education system. Um, it's we're delivering education in the same way we're delivering it decades ago, and the world has changed. The way we measure success and achievement, I think, is off center. I don't think it's the way we should be measuring these things. Um, you only need to look at the best performing nations in Europe and how they deliver education differently. But zeroing in on arts, it's, we had COVID and lockdown, and we've come back, and there is now an epidemic of mental health issues in young people, and we know this. So why have we not shifted more focus onto things that repair or support the healing process of that? We parents, teachers, everybody talks about this COVID generation's stunted growth in their social ability, social intelligence, but we're not doing anything about it. We're just putting them in classes where results are the only important thing. And yeah, like, we're moving into a digital age, so there is a level of, we need digital workers and digital skills, but we need human skills, because they can't be learned as easily as coding or mathematics. They can be taught. Human skills need to be developed and cultivated, and those things are encouraged and so much more prevalent in artistic subjects, or even and in PE and sport. There's a direct correlation between engagement for young people in the arts and the benefit of mental health. It's undeniable. The science is there. The results are there. So how are we not giving more support to the teachers, to the infrastructure, to allow for that to be rolled out on a more seismic scale to benefit this generation? We talk about education being these places of safety and sanctuary, but also learning. But learning doesn't exist just in science and maths and economics. It exists in learning how to be patient and kind and compassionate and collaborative. I can't speak too much on the academic subjects, but I didn't learn patience or collaborative skills in algebra. Didn't work for me, and my brain's not wired for that. Where I did learn how to work with other people is in the studio and in drama, where you're trying to make and create and share and understand. So we need big change, but that's an idealistic world. We don't live in an idealistic world. So we can talk about all these grand, beautiful, big ideas, but actually what's practical? And I think it's more now on the practical level is actually just people that, the education system itself actually respecting these things with proper support, not superficial support. Not just going, oh, doesn't that look cute? That's not support, that's condescension. That's a devaluing of what we're actually doing as dance educators or artistic educators. I have worked with some of the UK's best teachers, and they work day to day on threads of support, which is crazy. It's crazy to me, because when you zoom out of what they give their students is transcendent. It doesn't just stay in the classroom. It goes out into the world. And I just wish that, through the national curriculum, but then zeroing in on even in SLT, I've faced it. I know my colleagues have faced it, is not being given the resources we need to create the most change.
What's SL2, sorry?
Senior leadership.
Okay.
Head teachers, deputy heads, and I've worked in schools where students, don't do dance because there's no future in it. Right. Whether they go on to be dancers is irrelevant. It's the human skills, the transferable skills, the skills we learn in dance aren't the same as they are in other subjects, obviously, but they allow us to go into the working world maybe as slightly different humans.
Just dig into that. So dig into, like, obviously people will say don't go into that because there's no future in it. That's not necessarily where we should be guiding people. We should guide people into what's interesting them, what do they feel drawn to, without thinking too far ahead. I think that's where we go wrong a lot of the times. We try and lay out this yellow brick road in front of us that is always going to change. There's always changes. We change as people as we grow. So for people who maybe aren't going to become professional dancers and they know that, what are the benefits that they're getting from still going through that dance education?
There's so many different things. First, like discipline, like self-motivation, like resilience. We fail more than we succeed in dance. It takes a long time to learn how to be proficient in technique. You've got to get lots of things wrong. And I know from my experiences when I was a kid, if I couldn't get something right really quickly, I would give up and I'd throw a tantrum. I know my dancers do not have that MO. They're a lot more resilient than I am. When I was their age, they don't give up. They don't quit. And I think dance has the ability and arts has the ability to really build that resilience, that it might not happen overnight mentality. And that can only be a good thing. You have to collaborate. You have to think differently. You have to approach a problem differently. You have to think outside of the box. We have to, not everything's a straight line. And the collaborative skills, I definitely think the collaborative skills is like one of the biggest things, the ability to work with other people and do that respectfully. We might disagree, but how we disagree is important. And then I think respect and self-respect, those two things maybe are the umbrella for everything that falls underneath it. Training these young people to go, okay, well, dance is the thing we do. And maybe for a lot of you, it's who you are and who we are at the moment. But I keep going back to this human thing because it's really all it is. It's all that there is how do you exist in the real world? It definitely just teaches you life skills. But I think, going into like, what does it teach you? It teaches you so much about microcosmically about life. This does not happen overnight. It is not a straight line. You have to show yourself respect. You have to look at things differently. You've got to work with other people. You've got to learn how to play nicely with others. There are times where we compromise and there are times where we don't compromise, and understanding how to do that. I do think they're not specific to dance, but they're uniquely amplified in the artistic space.
I'd agree with that.
And I think those skills are so much more difficult to nurture than skills that can be picked up pragmatically. I can learn 2 + 2 is going to be 4, and that ain't going to change. But actually, how do I learn to hear someone, process what they're saying, deal with that respectfully, healthily, creatively, and then turn to the next person where all of that process is going to be different, but I've still got to find a way of navigating it. So 2 + 2 isn't 4 in that equation. It's going to be different. That is the world we live in. Everybody is different. And the artistic space cultivates that mindset and that ability to grow in those areas.
You mentioned success and achievement in your previous answer, and you spoke about sort of touching on how we generally measure that and quite often it is monetary or status that we look for. But outside of those things, what does success look like for you?
The obvious answer, the first thing that comes to my head is that my success is helping other people succeed and taking them further than I ever thought I could, and seeing them go on to achieve more than I have. So in a really maybe sad way, my success is in other people, like my students. Like they know that they mean a lot to me, but there's never really there's this really weird feeling that it's inexpressible, that like the pride I have in them is where I measure my success.
Yeah.
I have so many students now that whether they're dancing or not are going off and doing these incredible things. They've become incredible humans. For me, that's my success, there's a legacy of people out in the world.
Do you think they know that?
I hope so. I hope so. I try to articulate that as best I can, and to let them know that they're important in the world. They definitely know that I care. But I know that like there's an emptiness to that success, and that's not a good thing. I can't live in their success. I'm proud of it, and there is a large part of me that really wishes I could measure my own success better. If I try to, then there's the other side of it where I'm very much proud of like the work. If I can make a work that I can look at and go, yeah, that slaps. That's a good bit of choreography. That looked really strong. It garnered the reaction I wanted in the audience. It made this guy feel something and this person tear up and these people cry, like, which sounds really kind of crazy, but you want that as an artist. You want to make people feel things. So there's a measurement of success in that, in the work. So it's really those two source points for me.
Shaun, so something I like to do at the end of an episode is ask my guest to leave a question for the listener. Now, the idea of this is so they can go away and start a conversation with someone, whether it's a family member, a friend, or even a stranger. If you could give them a question to open up a conversation, what would that question be?
Okay, I've got something, and it's actually really simplistic. It's a really simplistic question, but there's something really maybe nice in keeping it simple. The question would be, what small thing could you do today to make someone's world a slightly better place?
Great question. Shaun, thank you so much for coming on. I really enjoyed this conversation and learning more about yourself and what you do. If people want to find out a bit more about you, follow what you're doing online, where can they find you?
So you can find the company, Dillon Dance, on social media platforms, Dillon_dance, or you can jump on our website, dillondance.co.uk. And that's kind of it. That's what's going on.
Yeah, I'll tag it all below so anyone listening can just scroll down and click on the links, nice and straightforward. And speaking to the listener, if you have enjoyed this episode, please do share it with someone who you think would find value from it. If you haven't already, please do rate the show and follow the show. It helps us get shown out to more people involved in the conversations. And you can also tag us into the conversation on Instagram at Lonely Chapter Podcast. And lastly from me, thank you for listening. Stay curious, and I'll see you in the next one.
Like and subscribe.